Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and today I'm going to attempt to kind of pull together sort of my spiritual path in a nutshell, and how I perceive the world and how I interact with the world around me, so to speak. This is a question that gets asked a lot. I get messages a lot about what is exactly your spiritual path, or what is what is your how do you see all of this working, and how do you see tarot working, and what is your role in that, and basically, what is your spiritual belief? What are you? Who are you? And I think that in a world in which we do feel most comfortable with labels, right? In labeling, being able to say, I am a Christian, right? Or I am Jewish, or I am Muslim, or I am Wiccan, or those kinds of things. It does make things easier, because with a word or two, we're able to, at least, although we don't know the entirety of that person's beliefs and practices, because there's so many variations within those things, we do get a basic framework in which we can somewhat see the place in which a person is coming from. Because I don't have a specific label, so to speak, I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for people to dial into exactly where am I coming from, which I think is what a lot of times the question of what is your spiritual path, or what is your religion, that's kind of how do you see the world, like what are you coming to the world with, what viewpoint are you coming to the world from. And so I have done this in a couple places, and I'll try to find them and link them. I have talked about the 5 books that sort of represent my path. I'm a reader, and so that's like a really good way for me to see sort of my spiritual journey in a nutshell. And I will quickly go over those. I do have a video on that, and I'll find that and link it. At the beginning of my I Ching videos and the Tao Oracle videos, I do talk about my path with Buddhism and Taoism a little bit, and so I'll try to find again those and link those below. But other things I have talked about, just kind of scattered here and there, and so I thought I would try to pull it all together, because I've had a few of these messages of late, and so I thought, okay, it's time to sort of do a recap and sort of try to pull it together a little bit more succinctly. Well, in other videos that I've done of this type, I have resorted to sort of using a deck of cards or multiple decks. Like my Journey with Grief video was the first one that I did this with, where I just sort of started to pull cards randomly without thinking a whole lot. That kind of was a story of my, up until that point, right, of my journey with grief, and cards that would reflect that. And there's another video, I can't remember what it is, that I did it on, and I've actually found it to be quite an effective way to pull together in a stream, in a story, because that's what cards are, as kind of pulling that story together with cards. So I didn't even intend to do that. I don't want to shuffle these because I have them in order, but I actually was kind of playing around with these after the animal video, and this deck is, a number of people have asked me this, and I don't believe that this is still available. Mr. Alex sent me this, and it's called the Moon Phases Oracle by Devin Strickler and illustrated by Lexi Marquis. I think that was how you would say that. I don't believe that this is still available, but I could be wrong. I will try to find out for sure and put it in the description bar below. But I was playing with this, and I started to without even thinking, because I've been mulling over, how I was going to manage this, and, how was I going to do this to answer this question the most clearly without taking forever, as you all know I'm capable of doing. And I started, pulling out cards and starting to see sort of the progress of my life and my kind of spiritual path with pulling the cards that I pulled. And so I thought, okay, apparently that is a format that really seems to work for me. So we can't, the story of my spiritual self begins at the very beginning, right? Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. My earliest memory, literally my very first memory, is of being in my room. I believe, given the house that I was in and given what my mom has said, that I'm pretty sure I had to have been around 2. And my very first memory is of and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on everything because again this would be a very, very long video otherwise, but just to kind of see the bigger chunks in which I see as sort of waypoints. And that very first memory, I have here the wolf moon, because it was at nighttime, and I had woke up, or I was awake in bed. I was quite little, and I had seen something in the corner of my room. And of course, that could be shadows, that could be all kinds of things, right? But for me, that was the beginning of where I would have said that I would first have encountered a guardian in the form of a wolf, in the form of a figure of a human figure as well, but slash wolf. It's a mix, and that is something that has stayed with me my whole life, and is very, very important to me. But that would have been where I first encountered sort of a guardian type thing, situation, and what I would consider to be a guardian energy, and certainly my very first looking back now, encounter with wolf as in the form of a totem or a guardian. And so I was quite young, and that, that's something that I have many, many, many memories, but that was the very first encounter of something that was, sort of outside of myself. And I would say that I spent most of my life with the veil being thinner, I think, than some people. That's how I like to describe it. I think that it's like a radio It's like a radio tuner. There are many, many radio waves out there, and depending on the strength of the tuner and the channels that it can go to and tap into, we hear very different things depending on what we're tuned into and what our frequency level is and how big our antenna is and all that kind of thing. And I believe that that's a natural thing, and that some people simply tap into other frequencies that other people don't see. I don't think it's anything unnatural. I think it is just part of our physiology, and some people simply have different and or stronger radio signals or stronger antennas, and that has certainly always been the case with myself. That entered into, and I've talked about this in other things, I'm not going to go again in great details. I grew up fairly lax, happy Catholic. We went to church only when we were at my grandparents'. I didn't really have any concrete understanding of religion. I talked to Mary all the time in the next to the little church where my grandmother's town. I had more of a sense of Mary than I did of God, and was just really very comfortable, lax, casual understanding of any type of religion. Much more in tune with trees. I literally believed and still believe that trees are alive and have spirits. I spent so many hours of my life as a child draped on the branches of a big, big old tree where I was grazing, another swinging in a willow tree, and I was definitely the epitome of a tree hugger. Literally, I would just lay and lounge up in trees. I was always up in a tree, and I listened to the leaves. I really truly believe there are stories in the wind and stories in the tree leaves, whispering back and forth, and that was and leaving acorns and building houses for Fey energy. I certainly from the get-go, that was sort of I had a very strong connection with tree and Fey energy, and then the storm came in the form of fundamental Christian religion, which made a very comfortable, very in-tune childhood to nature and trees and fairy energy and magic of life into one that was really about fear. The religion, my first experience with Christianity and with God, the Father, truthfully, was in the form of a hellfire and damnation. You're going to burn in the fires of, literally burning in the fires of hell. There are going to be demons eating your legs and maggots in your eyes, and you'll be there for all eternity if you don't say these magic words and become saved. This is what's going to happen to you. And as I've said before, I would have done anything after that message. I would have spun on my head, jumped up and down 3 times, run around in a circle, whatever I would have been told, I would have done. I was terrified. And I spent the better part of my life being terrified. After that point at night, I became extremely afraid of the dark. Everything that I considered to be integral to myself was something that was no longer valid. Imagination was frowned upon. Books outside of religious texts, which were my, home away from home, were frowned upon. Movies, we no longer went to movies. Like my whole world view was changed in an instant, really overnight, to one that was greatly encompassed by fear. I started by the end of high school. I was raised, I went to a fundamental Baptist school, small school, and didn't know anybody after that point, really, that wasn't of that same mindset. And by the time I was at the end of high school, I had started to really become I could never reconcile that ideology with what I felt to be true. And I just could never reconcile it. And I started to pull away at the end of my senior year. And then the next year after I graduated, I went to Africa to work at a blind school for a couple weeks. And there was a meeting that took place at the beginning. It was through a religious organization, although we were there to actually work at a blind school. We weren't so much proselytizing as working in the school, but it was still through a religious organization. And they were like, oh, it's really too bad. These people are raised in a world of fear in which if they don't do this, they're going to be punished, and if they do good things, that they'll be rewarded. It was just they were explaining in a tense tone of, oh, these silly people, this is what they believe. And I sat there and I thought, you're describing our religion. Like, that's what if you don't do this, you're going to burn in the fires of hell for all eternity. If you don't do this, if you don't obey your parents, you're outside of the umbrella and you can get struck by lightning. If you don't get married and get under the umbrella of the husband, you're going to be outside and you're going to get struck by lightning. You are essentially wicked, you're essentially evil, and you must be redeemed. That sense of you are nothing, and so here, take this, it's going to bring you up. Was exactly what they were describing, and that there was that literal moment where it was like, okay, yeah, no, this isn't right. And when I was there, where we were staying was in West Africa, and it was in a valley. It was in the middle of the jungle. We weren't out, we were not in the city. It was in the middle of the jungle. You could hear the drums in nighttime. It was just an amazing experience. Can't go into it all, but I had 2 experiences there that I just am going to use this beautiful tree moon because it just I had experience with a rainstorm. So I was at the top of edge of a valley lip, and a wall of rain was starting on the far side of the valley, and I could see, I've never in my life seen like a wall of rain, and it came just sweeping across the valley, you could just see it, just sweeping the front of it, just sweeping across the valley, and then where I was standing, it just washed, just hit like a deluge, and just washed over the top of me, and then it was gone. And it was just this moment of rebirth. It was literally a visual and physical with the rains and everything, it was a moment of rebirth that was just extraordinarily profound. And in that same time period, and we were up on, again, at the top of a mountain, and so there was nothing. There was no cities. There was nothing. We talked about this a little bit in live chat today. There's just nothing like sky in Africa, and it was just amazing. It was just like one of those moments you just can't ever forget, because the sky was so intense, and there was a huge full moon, and it was just literally looking like it was just hung like right on the side of it. It had to have been a super moon, because it was just so close and so huge that even today, 30 years later, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. And that combination of that orientation in which I realized, or I just really coalesced that understanding of that, I just simply could not reconcile what I believed to be true internally with this type of rigid religious structure. And then those two experiences had a profound impact on me, and changed, and also just seeing these people that were so very different from me, and what I had thought to come over and pity, and help, and come in and change their lives and pity them and feel sorry for them, taught me a lesson of beauty and a freedom from time constraints, and just an absolutely beauty and openness of spirit that profoundly changed me, because I'd had such a rigid, tight, only seeing certain people with a certain mindset, and it was a profoundly changing experience that rolled from that profoundly life-changing experience into a hugely profoundly life-changing experience in which I almost died. I had contracted the lethal form of malaria. My doctors didn't seem to know what it was. My mom kept saying she just got back from Africa. She could have malaria. No, this isn't really acting like malaria, because I was, just a hugely high fever and incoherent. And they finally sent my blood work off to a tropical disease specialist, who called my mother and said, get her into the hospital immediately. And he flew from out of town and flew in and to deal with it. And he had told me later, when I was recovering, that I was, less than a day away from not being alive anymore. And it was really touch and go, until I kind of came to about 9 days later. Literally, I was already quite small, but I looked like somebody who had gone through a concentration camp. Quite literally, it was horrible. And it took me a long time to recover from that. That was life-changing, and it literally was life-changing. What had, as I talked about, the veil being thinner, before that point, it was as if the veil, I think, was kind of ripped wide, and that had some profound changes on me that were very difficult to deal with in the paradigm of Christianity, which I still wasn't completely removed from that. It was not going to be very long from that point, but there were still a few years in which I was straddling that fence, because everything that I knew was involved in that religion. So while I kind of shifted away from more of the fundamental mindset, it was still within the context of that religion. And so having the veil ripped wide open was very difficult to deal with in that paradigm, in which anything that you might see outside of the physical world must, by its very nature, be evil. And so it was quite a confusing time period in which I feel what I consider to be the time of just kind of being lost in the woods. And there was so many information overload, and seeing different things that were so incredibly frightening, simply because I didn't understand them, not because they were necessarily evil, but simply because I didn't understand them. And I do believe that if you are in a state of highly heightened fear, you're kind of just sending out wave after wave of negative and fearful energy, then it's just a snowball effect. And so that carried on for quite a few years of just not being able to really function with that veil wide open, so to speak. And so that led to my second experience with, because we were been talking about totem animals, and that is what came with my second experience with Raven, and which I've talked about before, and which I just had this moment where I was just so absolutely terrified. I had an experience where I really literally felt like I fell out of my my body, right out the bottom of my feet, and raven wings and birds and sort of a Morrigan type energy just kind of swooped in, grabbed the fallen out of my body, me, yanked me back in, and just said, it's enough. It was that sort of energy. It's just time. It is time to stop being afraid. And I was never afraid again after that moment, because I really do feel it was a moment in which my perceptions completely shifted and changed. And I simply gave up trying to fit what I was experiencing into the past paradigm and decided to start just rebuilding. It was a period of dawn for me in which I was trying to figure things out, I stripped away, I had an experience with my son when he was a baby, and just kind of saying, I'm done with, you, whoever you are, God, you just stay over there, that kind of Abrahamic Godhead. You stay over there, I'll stay over here. We don't need to have communion with one another. Just leave me alone. I will leave you alone respectfully, but just let's not have conversations anymore, right? It was this very profound, again, moment of, and then it was just nothing for a while. But then came the dawn where it started to come to a point in which I needed to start to figure out what did I believe. And that's when I think that I started down the path of intention, right? Of actually trying to intentionally study, research, look into, and try to figure out with my own mind, both stripping away lenses that have been placed on me in my youth and growing up the way that I had grown up in religions, stripping those off, and at the same time trying to figure out, well, what do I believe as an autonomous human being? What is it that I believe? And that is, that is a life journey, right? That's something that is a lifetime of learning, and but it was done with intention. It was, from that point on, it was a deliberate researching everything you could possibly think of, researching it, discarding what didn't resonate with me, but learning something from it. And just continuing on this process of trying to figure out what really resonates with me. What is it that I really believe that is not something that somebody else placed on me? What do I actually believe about the world around me and how I interact with that world? And so this is already much longer than I intended it to be. But that then came, so that's when I think I need to just kind of recap. And again, I have a video on this, so I'm not going to go too far into this. But that's when it started down, the book path started, where I can sort of map, or just in sitting on my bookcase with certain books, I can see the path of my spiritual growth, me learning what it is that I believe became apparent. And the very first book for that was the Dow of Pugh, which was recommended to me by a friend. And I kind of, this speaks to that, because these first two books had a profound impact on the way that I see the world. And I guess that is my difference. And I think that that's something that's really important for anybody watching anything where I'm describing what I believe in, is that words matter, right? We can get down to semantics where we're kind of nitpicking at words, but words matter, and how we use certain terms is really important, because your idea of something, if a person says the word pagan, let's just use that, that's a broad term. If a person says the word pagan, well, when I hear the word pagan, I hear anything other than Abrahamic religions, right? It's pretty much a catch-all phrase for nature-based religions. Generally, they have certain things that are alike, and that they often follow wheels of the years. They follow cycles. They're in tune with natural cycles. And then there's all kinds of things that go underneath that. But nowadays, often pagan gets used as more of an actual label, like somebody is pagan, as if that stands for a religion. And if you're pagan, it means X, Y, and Z. So that having the same, coming to the conversation with an understanding of the words that we're using is really important. And so for me, many of the things that I incorporated into my worldview were as a worldview, as a philosophy, as a way of perceiving the world, and as a way of how I perceive myself interacting with the world. I don't really view them in the terms of religion, and that becomes really important when especially when I started really researching Buddhism. I came to Buddhism and Taoism and so on, as we're going to talk about, as a worldview, again, as a way of seeing the world, and as a way that I felt that I should and could and did interact with that world, which is very different than as a religion, because there are Buddhists who come to it as a religion, right? That's a little bit of a different experience. And so I think that that's really important to differentiate. But my very first big kind of moment was when I read this lovely little book called the Dow of Pugh, and it it fundamentally changed the way that, I like his right here, basic Taoism, but the basic Taoism that we are concerned with here is simply a particular way of appreciating, learning from, and working with whatever happens in daily life. And I really do associate this with this kind of leaf falling or a leaf floating on water. I associate Taoism very strongly with water. I also found this card here from the Dreams of Gaia very much encapsulates sort of how I feel about the key element that I learned about Taoism, in the sense that it was a sense of movement and a sense of letting go, and understanding that struggling against life wasn't always the way to do things, that sometimes we had to learn to see the flows, see the patterns that were going on, and just move with it, and exert little changes, but not just flailing and fighting against, because I was in a really difficult space with a very sick child at a very young age, and just consumed with questions of why, and questions of, big questions of life and death, and how to manage those things at quite a young age. And this was a profoundly impacting moment in which I learned to let go. And it was huge. It was a very big shift for me. And it literally came about from this book. If I came away from nothing else from this book, it was just the understanding that I had to just let go. And it was very impactful. And I will be forever grateful for the person who recommended this to me, and I will be forever grateful to Benjamin Hoff for this lovely little book, because it really saved my psychological self, and it was a lesson that I have never lost. Yes, I have struggled. Yes, I have not always followed the understanding that I gained that day, but I've always been able to get myself back to center when I needed to. So that was a profound shift for me, and it is an understanding that remains with me today. The understanding of balance and of harmony and of letting go, flowing into a situation instead of struggling and fighting against it, has become fundamental to the way that I perceive the world. Relaxing into a situation and starting to seeing the patterns instead of flailing against it opens all kinds of doorways in many different ways. So that was a profoundly changing moment, and it still informs me strongly today. The second book, which was right around the same time, and it was recommended by the same person, and literally I read this book, and then I think the next book I read was the Brian Bates' The Way of Weird. And this had the same sort of profound, oh no, I think I just put I had my cards and I think I just put them away. I don't know what oh, there it is. Like I had one for this. And this definitely is represented by the web, because this understanding of the web that I came to in this book, which I'm going to talk about more closely in a little bit, it profoundly impacts not only how I see the world and interact with the world, but also how I feel that I tap into tarot, how I think that divination works, how I believe that I can sit here in my room and do a reading for somebody who's in Australia, and we can have a connection, and we can have an impact, and we can have an interacting moment. And so from that very moment, this was, I don't know, I has to have been, I'm 38, so it has to have been at least, I'm 38, I'm 48, so it's probably going on 25 years ago or so that I had this, and it's forever stayed with me. So it's that impactful to me. It changed the way that I saw the world and the way that I interacted with the world, which is kind of what we're talking about. And so the other card, because I did also equate a Dreams of Gaia, because the understanding of weird means fate. So it's a sort of an Anglo-Saxon word. Weird is for fate or destiny, but the way that it's explained in this book is very different than that sense of being fated and being stuck on this path in which you have no control, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And the understanding that everything is connected. That is also something that I found with Taoism as well as Buddhism, but is the understanding of the interconnectivity of everything, and this giant web that is three-dimensional web that we are all on across time and space, and that allows us to connect to also with the collective unconscious way deep. This idea of the web is really, really a strong one for me. So I kind of connect that with this Dreams of Gaia card, with the Destiny card here. So this book impacted me greatly because because of the understanding of weird and fate. Today, the word weird means something strange, bizarre, or supernatural, but in its archaic and original sense, it meant that aspect of life that was so deep, so all-pervasive, and so central to our understanding of ourselves and our world that it was inexpressible. Weird refers to our personal destiny. It connects us to all things, thoughts, emotions, and events in the cosmos, as if through the threads of an enormous, invisible, but dynamic web. So it talks, that idea of the web and of weird is just a very important one. And it was actually also the first way, the first time I was introduced to the understanding of divination, of how that might work. It's just amazing. But I'm going to talk more about this in a little bit. But it really changed the way that I viewed the world in an extremely a big shift in the way that I saw the world, and so it's quite important. So that is sort of, those have stayed with me forever. After that, I'm just going to quickly pop through the rest of the books, although I do have a video on this, and the books change. These first two don't ever change, but there was a bazillion books. After this point, there was a bazillion books I studied later, quite a while later after that, studied Buddhism. I have so many books I can't even begin to. My first one I was exposed to was by Pema Chodron, Thich Nhat Hanh. Those two I probably have the most, if not all of their books. But I really love this little book called Buddhism Without Beliefs, because it really does speak just to the core ideology of Buddhism, and the understandings of compassion, and the understandings of, again, of connectedness, of us all being connected, and that what we do having such an impact on on other people, as well as I started, of course, a long time practice of meditation, and so much that I learned from Buddhism that it's, that's a whole nother video. But I quite like this one. This is always a good one for somebody who's just looking to understand the core understanding of it outside of religion, but simply as a philosophy, as a way of seeing the world, and as a way, as I said, of interacting with the world. To stop and pay attention to what is happening in the moment. In the moment is one way of snapping out of fixations. It is also a reasonable definition of meditation. To stop and pay attention to what is happening in the moment. That's meditation. Very, very interesting. But yeah, so this is a great book to just, like I said, sort of, if somebody would ask me, why do you, which had happened a lot because I was a Buddhist in a very Christian world. This was a good one because it really didn't get into religious aspects. It was simply a philosophy in which you can be, in my opinion, you can be a person with Buddhist ideologies that is a Christian, a Buddhist that is also a Muslim, or a pagan, or any other thing. I think for me, it's a philosophy and it's a way of seeing the world, and it suits with all different other things. So a number of books could be used for that. But my third exposure and the third sort of branch of, I think, what makes me, my ideology, my way of seeing the world would be one of those, either Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, or this Buddhism Without Beliefs by Stephen Batchelor. So these kind of are the three: Taoism, Buddhism, and what I come to think of, I didn't know what it was at the time, but is a Celtic shamanism, which we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's kind of the trifecta that really informs who I am as a spiritual person and how I view the world. Later on down the road, I keep this book in here. This is a book called The Velvet Elvis by Rob Bell, who is a Christian, but a much more modern Christian than I was ever exposed to Christianity. And I spent some time after I was well and solidly into Buddhism and whatever my Buddhist kind of Celtic shamanistic-y kind of mix was at the time. I spent some time kind of revisiting Christianity outside of the construct of fundamentalism, and I was able to really come to terms with and understand that the way that I was exposed to Christianity wasn't the only way, and I was able to reconcile a lot of my inherent knee-jerk reactions to Christianity, and understand there is a whole world out there of Christians who are open-minded and are still having a conversation. The conversation didn't end, at back in the times of Jesus, that the conversation is still going on and building and growing and shifting and changing. And so that was really important for me to reconcile that. Now, it was never something that called me back to it. It was not something that would ever place me back in that paradigm of thought again, but it was a reconciliation of a lot of an understanding of Christianity that I wasn't exposed to, and so is still very integral to my spiritual path, even though, again, it was never a religion that I could go back to or reconcile or practice, but I could at least reconcile it, and that was really important. The other book that actually reconciled me to my past in Christianity, which I don't think a lot of Christians, the way I was raised, would appreciate, was Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth. And I kind of keep this in my book of 5, and I've added to it, so I'm going to have to change that from more than 5, but this is a coalescence of all those things. The understanding that the story of religion, the story of spirituality across cultures. So we have, Greek mythology. I have my mythic oracle here. We have all these pantheons of gods and goddesses and beings and spirits across time and places. those myths, those archetypes, those understandings are important, right? They're all important because they are the story of what humanity is most wondering of and most afraid of, the things that they fear, the things that they hope for. It is a beautiful expression of the human spirit and the quest for trying to understand, who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Is there a bigger purpose? What is our bigger purpose? All of these big questions that people have across the time and space and ages, we can see in these beautiful myths that I don't use, and Joseph Campbell doesn't use, and I don't use the term myth as a derogatory term that as if it means a lie. Myth to me is larger than truth. That is where the kind of the understanding of the truth in the story comes from. Is this idea that I probably first was exposed to with Joseph Campbell, and also from another really good book called The Things We Carry, which is actually about Vietnam. But it's that understanding that sometimes the story is more important and more powerful than facts, historical facts. And that is the understanding that this book kind of expresses. And one, it's not just this book, it's just that this stands for that ideology or that understanding that all of the stories, right, all of our stories, I just think of, we dip in and out of myth across time and space and ages and places, and we dip in and out of myth, and it's all answering the same questions in different voices and different ways. And there's so much that we can learn from that. And so it kind of pulls the thread to all those different things and has something to say. And it really expresses how I see the world. And so that's kind of representative of sort of my path. And then, I said this in the other one, I kind of have to then add in a deck of tarot cards. This is my very first tarot deck ever. It's been since trimmed down, but this is the Llewellyn Tarot. And in a sense, this is a book, right? This is very much a book of archetypes and a book of understandings and a book of answers to those questions of what it is that we're afraid of, what it is that we hope for, what it is that we dream of, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, where we're trying to go, where we came from. All of those things, right, those are encapsulated in tarot cards, in this story that is the 78 cards. And so, that would probably have to be added in as sort of the sixth book in my journey. So I'm going to wrap this up here as part one. I don't know. I don't know if this is really very helpful in answering the question, but this is my path. And I'm going to in the next video, go a little bit more specifically in the use of two books, or I want to look a little bit more closely at the way of weird, the understanding of weird, some of the things that I learned from this particular book, and the understanding of the web that really do influence the way that I see the world and the way that I interact with the world and the way that I see things such as divination working. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more closely about that. And then I've had this book now for a while and have kind of worked my way through a section of this that I really have been working with a lot, and an understanding that, again, for me, I would not consider just as I think of Buddhism as an ideology, a monk is a practitioner, right? That's a very specific person who has taken a specific path and is practicing on a high level this ideology in a very concrete way. So for me, the ideology of shamanism, and especially that sort of a Western shamanism, has informed my mind since reading The Way of Weird so very, very long ago. But I don't consider myself on a shaman's path. I think that, again, a shaman is a practitioner and is somebody who is on a deliberate path. And so that, out of respect for that kind of terminology, but shamanism, the way that I see shamanism, is a worldview. It's a way of seeing the world, and it's a way of interacting with the world. So I have to always try to differentiate that, because I don't consider myself on the path of the shaman, even though much of my ideology and some of my practices do incorporate some of that. And so it's just hard to, I'm always very careful with those kind of words. And so it's hard when you're kind of an eclectic person, to be you always are careful of words. So I'm going to do it. The second video is going to be a little bit more specific about, how does, okay, all of this leads to who I am now, and what does that mean? That's going to be in the next part of the next video. So I hope that you found this of some interest. I would love to hear about your spiritual path. If you want to make a video on that or anything like that, I would love to hear, because I do find it interesting to see people's paths to how they came to where they are. So yeah, I would be interested in seeing that if anybody wants to do that or wants to put anything in the comments about their experiences. And I appreciate you for watching this.